Great, we're live. Okay, hello. Let's get some formal introductions out of the way. My name's Akshay, and then Arnav.
I'm Arnav.
And yeah, we're passionate about climate. We're passionate about sharing that information with high schoolers and other communities. We want to make a local impact. We're not really worried about making like a nationwide impact, but we really want to affect our community. So yeah, that's why we're here. We want to ask you a couple of questions. Hope you enjoy. So to start off, we're going to ask you a very general question just to get some discussion going. So climate change is a very global problem, and so as high schoolers, we're not seem to have as much power as we think we do. So what do you think as high schoolers we can do to combat climate change?
I think to start first is that to talk about climate change with your friends and families. I think there's like a huge discussions about climate change, whether it is true or like whether we can combat about it amongst our friends and our families, and people are so concerned whether we can actually do something for it, even though like we reduce using straws or like turn off our like air conditioner. How does it help? So like I think create a comfortable and safe environment to do a safe discussion about climate change would definitely help to improve climate change. But like after the discussion, you can start thinking about like what actually you can act for it, what topic you're interested in. For example, like if you're interested about circular fashions, you can start like you can start talking about how to use a second-hand clothes and encourage others to buy them or like reuse them in a proper way. Or like if you are focused on climate justice, you can focus more about like how climate change affect the vulnerable communities there and how we can help them. So like yeah, at first to talk about and second find your interested topic and to see what you can help with them.
Okay, so as an awareness, so like we're doing a podcast, so that's raising awareness, and that's just talking about climate change, and that is like one step which you could consider like we high schoolers could do.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true.
and if
Yes.
you like tell us something more about yourself and what Climate Incubator is, what organization you're from.
Yeah, I'm Blair. I'm currently based in Hong Kong. So like I'm co-founder of Climate Incubator, and Climate Incubator is a mission-driven company dedicated to nurture climate leaders and foster green employment in building a climate resilience future. And we offer training, mentorship, and a green job opportunity online platform for individuals interested in transitioning to a sustainable career. We also offer accessible network of green talents and corporate training workshops for businesses to embark and advance their sustainable journey. So personally, I'm interested about green job development and also climate justice issues, and I'm trying to do something more about it as a Hong Kong climate youth.
So what specifically does the youth sector of your organization do?
I think we're trying to bridge the gap about like the green job sectors in Hong Kong, especially as you may know, like people are struggling. There's so many green jobs burning up, but like I think employers struggling to find green talents for it, while like some high school student and university student they are struggling how to find green job for them. What kind of positions suitable for them? Are they pursuing like government sectors, business sectors, or like NGO sectors? How exactly working for them looks like for them? And we want to bridge up the gap and help the youth in Hong Kong to know more about what does green jobs looks like to you? How does the career pathway looks like to you? How can you achieve a meaningful job career through the green job sectors? And that's why we initiate a climate incubator mentorship program in Hong Kong and as well as Asia Pacific regions. And we link up the youth and young professional and expertise together and to transfer knowledge, skills, and experience in the green job industry and to share about knowledge and experience in the industry.
Okay.
Cool.
And As you've like been a part of a few COP conferences like COP26, COP27, could you tell us like some initiatives which are brought up in those COP conferences, or maybe which you think have potential of actually helping climate change?
Um, yeah, I think that's a good question. Like, I can talk more about what is COP, and COP is Conference of Parties, as you may know, started by United Nations. And so, like, in every years, so at every years there's could be like 196 nations sitting on the table to negotiate how we can help combat climate change. So there will be so many topics on the table. You can imagine there will be like climate finance and cutting fossil fuel usage, and also like the human rights program, the just transition program, and there will be furious topic about it. And attending COP26 and COP27, what I was following is that I'm following global static. As you might not heard of it, is that like the nations sign off the Paris Agreement, but like how do they achieve towards the target of reducing the like limiting the global temperature within 2 degrees Celsius and as much as 1.5. And the global study is using such a mechanism to take stock of what the nations are doing, including from like mitigation and adaptation as well as climate finance. And there have been like a report saying that like we're not making enough effort about it, and we're like achieve if most of the nations achieve what they have promised, we are achieving towards like 2.6 degrees temperature rise by the end of the century. So it's never enough, and we need to raise their ambitions in terms of like their national effort.
Okay, again, Rick, really quickly, what is global stocktake in simple terms?
In a simple term, is that like they take stock of what the nations is working for towards the Paris Agreement. So like how the nations and like how the nations working for to limit 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of like climate mitigations, adaptations, and climate finance. And I think it's a first of all a mechanism. So like in like before COP28, they were still struggling how to calculate it and how to measure it, because like there could be some qualitative measurements, like how do you measure human rights overall? Like how can you promise just transition and climate justice among their national efforts? That's something they're struggling in terms of qualitative effort. But in terms of quantitative efforts, it's about like how you limit 1.5 degrees Celsius, how do you achieve 100 billions dollars towards climate finance. That's a brief introduction about it.
Okay, great.
So going off of like, the UN and like the UN's role in climate change and all of that, what do you think the ethical implications are if we don't meet these climate goals in the next 25, 30 years? And do you think we will meet these climate goals in the next 25, 30 years?
I think I still have some glimpse hope about like we should meet this target. Otherwise, like you can see the climate crisis happening all around the world. Like in India, it is heating 50 degrees Celsius right now, and people are struggling for security and like water security, and they are dying of heat stroke. So like this is a life or death problem. And as I said, the national effort is like working towards 2.6 degrees Celsius temperature rise effort. We are never like we are far behind what we should achieve right now. So what the implication is that like we are working really slow in terms of like the international climate actions. But it doesn't mean that COP should never happen. It just means that we should work faster and aim higher together and collaborate between different stakeholders, including corporate, NGO, and the local communities, to work to combat climate change together.
So you said you were based in Hong Kong. So how is like what are the effects that you've seen of climate change? Have you seen them in Hong Kong? Like, what are the effects of it in Hong Kong and like your local area?
Yeah, thanks for asking it. Like in Hong Kong, like we are in a subtropical area as well as a coastal city. So what we're facing right now is like the co frequent heating of typhoon as well as high temperature, like heat wave, as well as flooding. So like last year, like we're hitting the record-breaking high temperature in Hong Kong in the summer. So like the heat is unbearable here, as well as like the typhoon is getting more frequent and intense. In the meantime, we can see like in Hong Kong as well as China, there's more frequent and intense flooding around this area. So like what we are facing is tremendous disaster right now. Is that we're facing a life of death problem, especially for the vulnerable groups there. Even though like you may think that Hong Kong is a developed city, you should have like a well-developed infrastructures about it, but like it still have social inequality existing within the city. So does mean like people who are working outdoors or like some people who are impoverished, they are unable to adapt to the climate crisis, and we are still struggling to find a way or like a community actions to come back against climate change.
Okay. And speaking of Hong Kong as a nation, what do you think, like, what are some other nations who are at their peak, like, at the border of if something else really happens, then the implications could escalate maybe. That's the right word.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Like Hong Kong is as a city, we can as already experience a lot of like impact of climate change. But like I think there's so many nations, especially like small developing countries and nations, they are facing like intense impact of climate change. Like Fiji, they're facing like really imminent coastal flooding and also like the heating of typhoon, and they are facing it could be the catastrophe for their extinctions of their nations. They might need to move their nations away from their original country as well. You may heard from like Thailand, they are planning to move their capital city as well. So like there's so many developing country as well as small islands nations, they are facing severe climate crisis.
For sure. So you were talking about a lot of like community initiatives, and you guys are still trying to figure that out. But have you seen any community initiatives either in Hong Kong or in these other countries that you thought were effective and that you would like to implement, in your own community?
Yeah, I have heard like, cause like I study Master of Climate Change, and I heard what they are doing in Marshall Island and as well as Fiji. So like they're implementing like community-based adaptations initiative, which means is that like you might like the government or like to the United Nations might have some target about how to achieve climate adaptations, but the climate adaptation strategies should be unique and local based in different contexts. So like the first of all, if you have to achieve community based adaptations, you need to consult what the local community really needs. For example, like in Marshall Island, they are facing this displacements under climate change. So people usually need to consult them whether they want to migrate to other area or just move back from the coastal line. And other than that, is that how to formulate a regulations with them or like policies with them, what is suitable for them. Like, do they have some local climate adaptation strategy for themselves and what they're depending on for their living? For example, they are depending for fishing. How do you ensure there's a sustainable fishing mechanism for them? And other than that, is that at the end you should have a proper community-based evaluations because like we're facing something we haven't faced encountered before. So like for climate adaptation solutions, it's something like trial and error. There's no absolute right answers. So I think all the scientists and also like all the government, they are trying something to solve this problem, but there will be error. So what you have to do is that when you encounter some kind of error and also failure, you need to consult the local communities and NGO. What is the error? How does it come from? And how can the local community help to do something about it? And I think the last key component is that to empower local community. Instead of asking them to do something, instead of just forcing them to do something, you should empower them to let them have the certain knowledge about climate change, about how to have a sustainable future, and let them to have like the powers to implement such kind of actions by themselves and just instead of just top-down approach.
Yeah, because I was reading an article the other day and it was about how sustainability looks different for each community because a lot of the workers in impoverished communities rely on jobs that are unsustainable. So just removing those unsustainable jobs is not sustainable for the community as a whole. So thinking about, sustainable ideas like that, I completely resonate with what you just said. But for sure, yeah. So for your community and for just anyone's community, because for me and Arnav, we live in a suburb. So for us, like climate change here isn't as severe as in Hong Kong or like other islands, but we still feel it. Like we used to have like all 4 seasons here in Ohio, but now like our winter time is much much longer than it used to be, and our summer time is much much hotter, and spring doesn't even exist anymore. So it's like we're kind of just, trying to get people to understand that. And so for you, like, what's one thing that you think you could tell someone to really make them understand the severity of climate change? Either a fact, either a statement, something that you feel encapsulates the urgency that we should feel to tackle this issue. You can think about it. It's like a
Yeah, cause like I've studied about climate education for a long time, and sometimes I really struggle when I was working, like I'm working really hard about climate actions, but still my friends and family, they are still holding back, and I have been struggling thinking about why is that? How does it come from? Like why do you know there's such kind of issue, but you won't like to work for it? And I've been struggle for it for a long time. But what I realized, like in Hong Kong specific, is that in a long time ago, when we talk about climate change, it's a distant problem. When we talk about climate change, it's relatively a distant problem. We saw a lot of advertisement about like how polar bear getting like going to extinguish and how the turtle affected by using plastic. But like the climate change problem feels so distant from us. Like why do we care as a human? But right now I think climate change is a life or death issue. It's not only about happening in developing countries. It's not only happening in small developed nations. It's gonna happen to you as a human. You can see like into your neighborhood, like you can find there's like an old man struggling to get some cooling solutions under a hot summer. And you can see disabled people struggling to evacuate under typhoon. And you should reflect on like how the vulnerable communities around your neighborhood are affected by it right now. And like and maybe you never think about it, and in your community it might not be as severe as other country, but like if you imagine if it is not that severe, but how about other countries? How about in India, in like Thailand, in Fiji? How do they struggling for life? So like I think if you connect with climate change as a human, think it as a life or death issue, you'll be more willing to protect your planet by yourself as well as the future of our future generation.
And as you mentioned, polar bears going like extinct. What could like humans face? What's the worst thing that us as humans could go through?
I have thought about it for a long time. But like, truth to be told is that climate change, what happened under climate change, the impact of climate change is irregular. You can never like you can try to predict it like a scientist, but as I mentioned, climate change is unpredictable under some context. Like you may see something like the heat wave is gonna like increase for 50%, but like you never know how it's gonna happen, when it's gonna happen, and where it's gonna hit. So like based on the unpredictability issues of climate change, I think there will be no safe place for humans. Even though like Thailand is trying to move its capital away, even like Fiji, people in Fiji and also Marshall Island, they are moving away from the tropical from the tropical centers. But like we are still struggling. For example, in even in Europe and United States as well as like Canada, you are still facing different kind of wildfires. So like climate change is not only happening in developed countries, they are happening all around the world in different forms. So I think there will be no safe place for us to evacuate.
And when do you think, if we were to miss all of our climate goals, would this like disastrous event happen?
Um, I think it's already happening. You can see wildfires happening every year in Canada, in the United States, and Australia, as well as heat wave in Europe and the British. Yeah. So like I think re right now we are already falling short of our target, and we are really existing under the climate crisis. We're not like we're not saying like what will it will happen if we are hitting 1.5 degrees Celsius. If you look to this data, we are already hitting 1.1 degrees Celsius right now. We're just 0.4 degrees Celsius away, and we are already hitting so many climate crises right now. So if we are falling short out of this kind of targets, you can imagine how the human gonna be doomed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay. So to shift topics a little bit, so I know we asked you this kind of at the beginning of the interview, like the podcast, but what optimistic tips would you give high schoolers that they can maybe implement in their everyday lives to, help climate change, to raise awareness, post other than just having, discussions with their family and friends? What actionable tips do you think that they could use? Because a lot of people are like, oh, no one will listen to me if I talk, or like they won't care about my opinion. So what other things, or even how do you want them to express their voice regarding climate change? What tips do you give them regarding that? This entire like umbrella of like how do they make an impact? What do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I First of all, I want to say like even though climate change seems really a climate crisis and life or death right now, seems is not an optimist. We're not in an optimistic trend about it, but like we still have to stay hopeful. So like what you're saying, like what you can do as a youth is that I think as a youth you can be innovative. You can be think out of the box. How like I can talk more about like my personal story, how I started Climate Incubator with my friend is that like you just met a lot of people who share the same passions and you just find what interests you, what the interests you have in common. Maybe like my friend and I have similar interests in green job development as well as climate justice. So reflect on what you can do as a youth. Instead, like I think other than just telling you what you can do, I would say like don't limit what you can do. Just think out of the box. Like we initiated a mentorship program just by myself as and my friend like Jessica and Carly. And most of when I was young, I really always question myself like as a you what I can do. But like if you keep questioning yourself, you wouldn't take the first step. You will keep circling, keep yourself in the small circle and keep questioning. But like just take the first step and find people who share same passions with you and carry the very small step like for example like if you're interested in circular fractions what you want people to do. Maybe you can host a like second hand fashion week in your school. Maybe you can like ask your school to be more climate neutral. Like can they implement more or like install more solar panel in your school or like in your neighborhood? Can you like write a position paper for them? Like you want something to happen in your neighborhood and your school, and just not keeping yourself or limiting yourself within a small circle.
Okay. And
Sure.
moving away from like actions,
Hmm.
what are some economic impacts of climate change, and how can those economies then recover or like adapt to climate change?
I think like talking about the economy and the climate crisis is that there's a lot of losses we call like loss and damage, which include like loss of infrastructure, like damage of the infrastructure, damage in the society and your community, and also loss of life. And it's already hitting like more than 1 million and even $1 trillion around the world. And the reason why we should act right now is that if we don't do any preventive actions, our economy is just gonna like backfire by our inactions, and we will keep losing our infrastructure and our money, and also as well as human life. So the reason why we are voicing out for 100 billion climate fund and the COP is that we need to make sure this kind of fund can be channeled to some developing country as well developing nations, to people who really need help, their help. For example, like in some country they are hit by the typhoon. How can they like we how can they engineer to be more climate resilient? Like for example, how can you install more solar panels or like more dikes again flooding to prevent like this catastrophe happen to your neighborhood? So I think yeah, to economy is gonna be a lot of loss and damage happening. But like what we are taking is like we need to take more preventive actions to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, for sure. Arnold, is there anything else you'd like to ask?
Um,
Give me a second. I think we've covered all our bases. We asked you about youth initiatives. We asked you about your role in COP.
yeah,
We asked you about your organization itself. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about like your work or what you do in general?
yeah.
Yeah, I can talk about more about it. I just finished a master of study, like a master study of climate change at University of Waterloo. So I just came back to Hong Kong to continue work as a youth to push for climate change. But I think I hit a
Well,
struggle about it. Is that like I I'm definitely interested about disaster risk management since the study of climate change, like the master study of climate change.
yeah.
But what I am facing in Hong Kong right now is that even though the climate crisis is happening right now, there's like lack of attentions by the government as well as NGO who are working for it. Like, of course, there will be like there's Red Cross in Hong Kong who are working for it, but like there's not diverse spectrum about NGO how to like break the silo between the social community to work for the disaster risk management and climate adaptation in Hong Kong. So like what I'm working right now is like we're trying to work more as a youth group to push for ambitious climate adaptations. So a suggestions for you is that if you see some kind of shortfall or like some kind of like something is missing. For example, the climate adaptation actions is missing in your neighborhood or like community, and you find some other countries working for it. So trying to complement this kind of loopholes, because like there will be funding, like there will be continuous funding for supplement this kind of actions, but like there lack of driving force. Let youth be the new driving force of the society to think about like innovative and all as well as practical solutions to fight against climate change.
And like
Thank you for
speaking
that.
of this mission and Climate Incubator, could you tell us like how you were inspired and motivated and what was the spark that made you study and dive deep into this issue of climate change? And how do you form Climate Incubator with your friends?
Yeah, I can talk more about like how we found like how we find climate incubator. The reason why we found about like find climate incubator is that like when we as a youth we're struggling to find a green job in Hong Kong. So like even though you study in high school and you study in the university, you are trying to say like, oh, I study like for me, I study geography and I was struggling like what I should work after graduations. Like other than working for like traditional NGO, environmental NGO or like some consultancy, what is the spectrum of green job looks like to me? How can I pursue meaningful career after graduations? And that's something the educational system cannot answer me for now. So like what Climate Incubator is trying to do is like to fill in the gap, to offer a mentorship program, to offer training, and as well as green job that like the educational system cannot offer you. And we try to like as well as like if you encounter some kind of issue in like pursuing green job, you find difficulties in pursuing green job, you should find a network and as well as people to talk to. Because like you can always search online to see, oh, how can I overcome this, or like how can I find a green job? But like it's never as practical as you or as you talk to someone who already have experience in the industry. So like if you want to be an urban planner, but you want to pursue climate change as well, but it's not happening in Hong Kong. So what you should do is that you talk to people around the world, like for example in UK or like in US, what they are doing for now, to see if I can like pursue the same goal in Hong Kong. Or if not happening, how can we bridge the gap between like Hong Kong as well as like different regions? So like what we are trying to do as in a climate incubator is trying to nurture the networking skills of youth, which like Hong Kong youth did, who is not commonly shared with. So we're trying to bridge the gap right now.
Mm.
For sure, yeah. That's really interesting. I wish we had something like that here, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And
You can
speaking about
always
like
start
aware,
something like this.
uh and speaking about awareness and us being on a podcast, we would like to clear out some big misconceptions about climate change too. So, what do you think are the top three biggest misconceptions about climate change that we could maybe address in this podcast?
Let me think about it. Is that mm, I think there's a lot of misconception. Is that like the first misconception is that climate change is not true, which I haven't asked the same question before by my families as well as friends. And the second misconception is that you cannot act against climate change. Like your families, sorry, is my network okay right now? Because like I saw the
Yeah.
unstable network right now. I think
Yeah.
the second misconception is that like the youth is lacking capacity to fight against climate change. Like the reason why I say about it is that when you have something you want to do, maybe you want to tell your school or like your neighborhood to act for something. Maybe to install a solar panel or like you want to host a climate talk in your school. Maybe like some adult will tell you like you're not qualified to do it. Why would I let you to do so? And you are not experienced enough to tell me something like this. Like it happens all the time. and they are trying to undermine you, like what you are thinking and what you are trying to do as a youth. But like as a youth, you need to fight against them in a more innovative way. Is that how you can what makes you qualified? You need to think about like what makes you qualified to fight against climate change. Is that after graduation entering the workforce, is that you realize you will be limited by the working culture as well as some missions of your company. Maybe you want something happening in your company, but you're afraid to do so because it will damage the branding of your company. But as a youth, you don't have such a burden. You don't scare like to talk something out. You don't scare to advocate for something. Yeah, I think that's one the true power about being youth is that you don't scared being limited by anything. And you have the right to say something you want to achieve, even though you're not qualified to make that happen. But you can like network and make the collaborations happen to make the policy makers to collaborate with local community as well as the youth in your neighborhood to make the changes happen. But for the third one, I don't have an idea right now.
Okay, that still works. Two is great.
Thank you, though. I think we're gonna wrap it up, but thank you so much for your time and your information. I mean, these are really valuable experiences for us since we're also like a new like climate organization, you could say. So listening to your story is really helpful for us, and especially like the specific examples that you gave regarding like community efforts. That was really insightful. I think that's something that we're definitely gonna like try and investigate more, and that really you really helped us with that information. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for working for it as a youth.
Thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
No worries.